In this short film, we will explore the effects of the Chinese government's decision to create national parks in China. While effective in boosting economic development and attracting tourists from different parts of the world, there are very clear negative consequences on the local environments and communities.
By looking at two case studies that encompass the most common implications seen in the majority of the parks, we will use the frameworks of environmental justice as well as power and privilege to help minorities and underrepresented communities that are disproportionately affected by the park's construction. Over thousands of years, China has been filled with rich biodiversity, exotic animals, and magnificent landscapes. In the beginning of the 1980s, some of these areas were classified as national parks to preserve the ecosystem around it and its historical value. One of the most famous parks in China is home of part of the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall has been standing since the 1600s, impressing generations with its magnitude. But it wasn't until 1982 that it was declared a national park for the world to enjoy. So what changed in China to cause the formation of these parks? Reconstruction happened. Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping's social and economic reconstruction bettered the quality of life for the majority of people in China, but at the cost of the destruction to the ecosystems from the exploitation of natural resources and pollution. Therefore, the primary principle behind the creation of national parks was ecological protection. The park in
Huairou, Beijing,
among many others, serves as national cultural treasure that transcends time and historical events.
The amount of national parks remained few until it began to increase in 1991. The economic boom of 2000 to 2013 continued to fuel the growth of national parks as more people could afford to visit them. By the end of 2014, the China State Forestry Administration had constructed 791 parks, primarily as a national strategic effort to increase the gross domestic product through the industry of tourism. The parks are administered at the national, provincial, and local level, or a combination of the three, depending on the park's size and number of visitors. Since the Chinese government wanted to seize opportunity for economic growth while maintaining the park's original purpose, different departments were created and managed by separate administrative bodies. The local management of the parks was first composed of local officials selected by the state government, who then appointed members of their communities to help maintain the national parks. This worked well, but the state government still wanted to maintain control of the national parks administration, so they sent their own members to replace local people with educated upper-class officials. This, of course, caused civil unrest, so the state government tried to create a partnership between the locals and those from the state. Although this was a fundamental idea, the bodies in the structure did not communicate across differences. The groups did not seek one another to help approve park decisions because it took longer to get approval, so they avoided the new regulations. As a result, the goals of conservation and communication between those in power and the locals were not met. The long-term implications of the additional departments was the fundamental cost of economic sustainability, environmental harm, and social injustices, which will be addressed through our case studies.
Let's examine a case study of how economic priorities of national parks had dire effects on local populations. In this case of
Jiangjiajie
National Park, the first national park in China, created in 1982, became China's first UNESCO site in 1992. The area is filled with magnificent landscapes, diverse wildlife, and rare flora. The park has also been classified as a National Geological Park in 2000 and a World Geological Park by UNESCO in 2004. Due to this, the State Forestry Administration, Ministry of Construction, and Ministry of Land and Natural Resources are all involved in managing the park. The park was created in an area that consists of
Tujia, Bai, and Mao
ethnicities, all minority groups in China that have been living in this area for thousands of years. The national park has provided substantial economic growth and an income for a portion of the locals that are employed by the park. Yet, low levels of education among local people often prevent them from being employed by the park. This leads to many locals being forced to relocate outside of the park area. Due to this, many economic benefits often are provided to outside groups and are not received by the locals. This is an example of environmental injustice where the locals are forced to move and do not receive the economic benefits from the creation of the park. Many locals refuse to move because of low compensation packages and since finding a new job in a different area is difficult. This is an issue of procedural justice since the government made the decision without the approval of the locals who would be relocated. It is also an issue of retributive justice because those who are relocated are not receiving adequate compensation. While the goal of the national park was to protect the natural landscapes and species, the consequences of creating the national park have negatively impacted the environment as well as the wildlife in
长假节
The national park attracts over 1 million tourists annually, with up to 40,000 tourists a day during the high season. The high volume of tourists is causing soil erosion and water pollution, which is degrading the land. It is also leading to pollution of items such as plastic bags and containers, which causes harm to the wildlife. Despite warning signs not to feed wildlife, tourists have also fed monkeys food, and this is dangerous for the monkeys to become used to human contact. In order to increase economic profit from the national park,
长假节
has focused on development within the park area, including hotels, cable cars, a sky elevator, and the newly built glass bridge to attract tourists. These developments have altered the natural landscape of the area and also led to further environmental problems, including air and groundwater pollution, as well as disturbance of wildlife.
Let's look at another case study, this time at Sangjiayuan National Park, located in Tibet. Animals like the endangered snow leopards and antelopes had been decreasing in numbers due to land degradation and poaching. Climate change and overgrazing have also led to environmental degradation, including desertification and the melting of glaciers in the area. The Sangjiayuan National Nature Reserve was created in 2003 and then transitioned into a national park in 2016. The national park will open officially in 2020. The park was created in order to prevent environmental degradation and protecting the species that live there. The Sangjiayuan National Park has created 17,000 parkkeeper jobs for the local people, yet there are many more people who live in the area that have to relocate. Many of the local families had lived on this land for generations, and they neither wanted to move nor were able to. Many were nomadic herders that lived off the land, and relocating meant the loss of animals and sustenance. The Chinese government had not consulted the Tibetan nomads in the decision to relocate, and on top of that, it portrayed the nomads as a primary threat to the Tibetan fragile ecosystem. Many families who have resettled have been upset by the income that they have lost and the low compensation they have received. The families that were able to stay and get jobs at the park also faced difficulties. Xi Chengji, pictured here with his wife, worked for a few months as a park ranger and then stopped receiving paychecks from the government. He called the government, but no one would answer, so he decided to quit if he hadn't received compensation by the end of the year. He wants to return to his life as a yak herder, but suspects the government will not allow him to, which leaves him with far fewer options. This is a perfect example of the ongoing lack of transparency, communication, and or complete lack of compensation on the government's behalf.
While there have been issues with the composition of national parks, China has created incentives to mitigate the negative impacts that the parks cause. One of the more popular incentives is known as the zero litter policy. The tourist behaviors has brought many environmental problems to the national parks. In 2013,
Huangshan
National Park recognized this and created an effective solution to alter tourist behavior in order to reduce litter generation by simplifying and facilitating litter collection and transportation in Chinese mountainous areas as part of the Zero Litter Initiative. The Zero Litter Initiative was a new attempt to reduce tourism litter generation on climbing trails in China by having tourists bring down their own litter from the climbing trails in order to receive souvenirs.
While the Zero Litter initiative has taken off, the locals still do most of the work to keep the parks intact and do not get much credit or receive adequate compensation. As a result, the Chinese government has issued detailed reform plans to appease the locals, tourists, and environmentalists. Since the current management structure is fragmented, the locals and the government are working hard to improve the national park system so that the facilities used by local people every day can be improved, as well as the facilities used by nature-based research, education, and tourism. There is no way to guarantee that public welfare will be improved through conservation. This can only be determined via institutional changes in the management, finances, and social injustices.
Future programs like the Zero Litter Initiative are the necessary steps that China has to take to improve the damage that came at the cost of economic profit. China can continue to improve the toll that tourism has taken on the environment and the locals by including the people living in the area in decision-making and making sure that they profit from the national parks equally. If China continues to move forward in this direction, then they will not only improve relations between locals and the government, but meet the goals of ecological protection that the national parks were originally created for, and the future will look brighter for later generations.